Hey, this is Brock McGillis, and you're tuned in to SUAVV Sessions.
All right, Brock. Again, it's a pleasure meeting you. I think you may be only the maybe second hockey player I've spoken to do an interview. So
Cool.
it's really cool to do that.
Who was the
One,
first?
it was you're about to age me. This was 10 years ago, and I can't remember what his name is. He was a black player, played for the Philadelphia Flyers back in like
Brashear?
2000. Brashear. Yeah. That
Donald
was
Brashear?
2000. Jesus, 2007.
Wow.
Ouch.
It's a minute ago.
Yeah, that hurt. That hurt a little bit.
Sorry.
It's okay. But I think I went to the game. I found a completely different appreciation and respect for you all because I didn't realize how athletic it was to be a hockey player. One, I can barely skate on ice, period. So like the maneuvering and like speed and like change of direction at an instant that you guys have mastered it's insane. But I do my research. You grew up in this. Like your dad was a coach, your brother was also a professional hockey player. So this was like your childhood, basically.
Yeah, I'm from Canada. I lived down the street from an arena in northern Ontario, Canada. And every day after school, I'd go to the rink hoping I could jump on the ice.
Yeah.
And if teams were on, I was hoping they were missing a goalie so I could go in net. On weekends, my parents would drop off all my meals at the arena. I lived there.
Yeah. That is cool. And you wouldn't think that you want to be the goalie, right? Because you want to try to be in the action, skating up and down the rink. You guys are, if you lose a game, it's your fault.
Mm-hmm.
If you win a game, you have nothing to do with it. Like you bear the responsibility for the losses. What made you want to take on that responsibility at a young age?
Honestly, I think it's my love of attention. I as a kid, I gave my dad 3 reasons why I wanted to be a goalie. One was the equipment was cool. Another one was all your teammates come and congratulate you at the end of the game. And number 3, you every time you make a save, everyone cheers for you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I've realized, especially on the tour I'm on, that I'm, as much as I'm an extroverted person, I'm really an introvert.
Yeah.
So being an extroverted introvert, like the goalie thing makes even more sense now.
It makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. You do have the coolest helmets or face guards, I guess you would call them.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're uniquely designed by the goalie for the goalie, I think that is insanely dope.
Yeah, it's one of the only times in hockey that you can show individuality.
Yeah.
Like they don't let you, like other sports let you, and you can still play for a team while being yourself. Hockey doesn't let you do that unless you're a goalie.
Basically, there's no individuality outside of that. You growing up in sports, growing up in I would assume hockey is an extremely male dominated sport. I don't even know if there are really female hockey players, but I may be very wrong on that.
There are now. There's a professional women's league.
Okay.
There used to be 2. Now they've kind of merged and created one, sort of the equivalent of like the WNBA.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think that's really in team sports. Well, I guess soccer has as well. But yeah, it's really coming on hot. Like women's hockey and women in hockey is blowing up.
I need to definitely promote that some more because I don't think enough people know about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool.
Nice. But growing up in that atmosphere, it's very, very machismo, very physical, very, very demanding. How do you grow up in that atmosphere being a gay kid and still really trying to, I guess, match energy within that sport? And like how challenges was that even as a kid growing into that?
It was so tough, and listen, there's gay men who are as macho or masculine as straight men. I think, like a lot of people
Right.
have a misconception of that, but it's like it's almost like you are assumed to be feminine and not as masculine or tough, or that you won't have your teammates back because you're gay. And
Right.
then on top of that, there's locker rooms. The most common ways that hockey players put each other down in locker rooms or on the ice is either using homophobic or sexist words.
Oh,
There's a ton of racist stuff as well, and it's usually targeted specifically at members of BIPOC communities. But in terms of like the overarching, everyone puts each other down using homophobic language and sexist. So it's it wasn't easy, and I had to suppress it. I adhered to the norms of the culture and became the stereotype of a hockey bro. And frankly, I was a womanizer as a teenager, just because I felt like I needed to.
yeah. So when you and I think you point out a very important fact is that again, gay doesn't equal feminine. And it's really getting people to kind of realize there's not one personality in the gay spectrum. Like there's a lot of different variations. And I think a lot of us as adults who came out as adults, you spent a lot of that time as teenagers, young adults, trying to show what everybody else wanted and not necessarily being yourself or being true to yourself. Was that struggle really hard as a teenager going into young adulthood, or was it just kind of like, let me wear this mask and stay below the radar?
It was awful. It was probably the most difficult thing I ever endured in my life, to be honest with you. Um, I was so afraid. Like, once you get to a certain level in sports, it becomes your identity,
Yeah.
right? Like, so even as a teenager, moving away at 16 years old, and you come home and your friends are asking you about hockey, or you see relatives on holidays, they're asking you about hockey, parents of friends, teachers, whatever it was. It becomes your whole identity. It's all people talk to you about. And it's like, well, and then you're hearing this language that's telling you it's bad or wrong daily, and it wasn't even necessarily directed at me, or no more so than anyone else in the room,
Right.
but hearing it negatively every single day, it starts to become like ingrained in your mind that it's bad, that you won't be able to play the sport that's your identity if people know you're gay.
Right.
So by 18, I started drinking heavily. 18 to 23, I drank every single day to numb it. I had season-ending injuries every year from 15 until I retired in my late 20s.
Wow.
I was suicidal, self-harming, depressed, drinking, injured, and it impacted my career. I mean, I went from being on NHL draft lists and supposed to have this like straight trajectory to the NHL to playing in the minors in the US and in Europe, because I was just such a train wreck.
Yeah. Was it the pain? Not, I want to say pain. Was it the yeah, I guess it will be considered like the pain of trying to hide who you are. Do you think that was a big part of the detriment that caused everything else going in outside of the injuries? Do you think that that was kind of pivotal to the mindset that it takes you to get to that professional level?
Yeah, I think, if I had either, in hindsight, I believe like my family's super supportive and welcoming. And I think had I maybe come out to them when I was 14 or 15, my
Yeah,
career would have been on a different trajectory. They could have got me the resources and support I needed. They could have made sure every, team I went to was a space that would be welcoming,
right,
and no different than any other marginalized person. Like if if a coach is bigoted, you're probably not going to send a person of color into that locker room, or a girl on a boys team,
right,
if they're sexist. You know what I mean? Like you're just going to put people in the safest situations possible, and you're probably going to research the situation before you put the person into it, as
right.
opposed to, oh, this is the best team, they want you, and this is a good fit, go play because of hockey. There's other circumstances that would have been looked at.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you tell the story about how you were watching something with your dad, and somebody said that they were gay, and you asked him how he would feel if it was you, and he told you he would love you regardless, and showed you that because he and your brother both they became kind of like advocates on verbiage of what people would say, and if they said it, they would correct them, which ultimately is outing you because they're telling everyone like, you can't do that, my son is gay, when you're not the one telling everyone. So it's even in that protection status, like your family becomes not just like the biggest supporters, but advocates of their own for you.
Yeah, that's partially why I didn't come out to them for so long, is out of fear that um, language use in men's team sports isn't always the nicest towards LGBTQ plus people.
Yeah.
And I was afraid that they would hear that language, and instead of just, like for most people in the cultures, when it doesn't impact them, it's probably something they just don't even necessarily hear.
Right.
Right? It's just another word said, and then they move on, or they don't critically think about what that word actually means. And I was afraid that if they knew, they would stand up, because that's who they are. And that's
Yeah.
who they ultimately became for me. But at the time, I was afraid it would jeopardize my career. And I was just in self-preservation mode as a player. So I was too afraid of even telling them.
Yeah. It blows my mind that saying you're gay in professional sports could be the end of your career. Like it doesn't take away your athletic ability. It doesn't take away from accomplishment, skill. None of that goes away. It's just someone finds out what your sexuality is. And now you can no longer do the thing that you love to do in the sport that you're amazing at. Um, where where is that disconnect? Is it in the front office? Is it in the locker room? Is it like a combination of both? Is it like a fear of the fans? Like, how does this happen?
I don't think it's fans. I think for the most part, in most team sports, or like most fans of sports teams, are pretty progressive. Um, I think it's front offices
Mhm.
in some instances, and mostly locker room.
Okay.
And I think it's because of a lot of things. I don't want to get boring and talk about, like, you know, different sociology terms or anything like that, but like, or feminist terms, but things like the male gaze, I think, play into it, where people assume
Mhm.
that the way men may look at women is how the gay guy's going to look at their teammate in the locker room.
Which is absolutely not the situation.
Well, it's funny, like the first time, every single thing they do and who they do it with. So like that's number
Right.
one, right? Like there's so much stuff they do that is like, I don't think you're gonna be into them once you know the things they do.
Right.
Number two, it's funny. First time I ever spoke publicly was high school.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a hockey player, had a little smirk on his face and put his hand up at the end. And he goes, "What about in the shower?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, is it awkward for you or your teammates?" And I said, "I don't know about you, but every team I've been on, they call themselves a family or brothers. Would you agree?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, do you check your sister out in the shower?" He turns out I know his sister. I didn't know that she had a brother. But
that is the best gut punch you can give a high school kid. It's amazing.
But it's true. Like, this is the reality. It's like, that's your family. If you're calling each other family.
Yeah. You're not looking at each other that way.
No, not like that. You know
No.
what I mean? Like, so it's and I've had, listen, I've been on calls with professional athletes where they call and they're like, "Brock, I'm cool with a gay teammate, but like they should have their own showers." I'm like, "You want segregated showers?" Like, think about that. Think about what you're saying.
Right.
And then they think about it and they're like, and I'm like I've had calls with players where I'm like, "Do you go on vacation with your teammates?" Like, and it's multi-sport. This isn't just hockey. Yeah. I'm like, "Okay, warm tropical spots." Yeah. I'm like, your teammate is more likely to be checking out your wife or girlfriend on the beach than your gay teammate is to be checking you out.
Yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
Very true.
And they're like, "Oh, I never thought about that." I'm like, "Yeah, so maybe you should. Maybe you should."
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's the beauty and the irony of this conversation. There's so many misconceptions because there's not conversations around sexuality, and everyone has their assumptions of what's happening inside of the community, and you kind of just run off of the assumption. And it takes someone sitting down and going, "That's not how this works." Like, no, that's absolutely not. I really don't care. And you just you hear the stereotypes, and you just kind of sit there, and it's like, where did you get this shit from? Like, how did you come up with this?
It's so absurd.
Absurd.
But I think it's because people see it as it's not humanized for them, right? So to your point, those conversations humanize issues.
Right.
It puts faces to it. It's real life. But before that, it's just abstract. It's all theoretical.
Yeah.
But when it becomes real life and it's real people and something, and you really put a face to it, I think it changes things as opposed to these assumptions and abstract and theory and possible outcomes. It's like, no, these are real human beings, and this is the impact.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're dealing with this, and you're dealing with, like, again, the injuries, the cloud of gay in the sport, you ultimately don't come out until after you retire, again, for protection of your career. So for that long, you have to keep this to yourself, and you start having suicidal thoughts. You said you were diagnosed with depression at 15. You struggle with anxiety as well. So to date, those two things are sitting there. What does your support circle look like during your professional career when you're dealing with all of that, and ultimately thinking on however many occasions, like, it's just easier to not be here?
I had support in the sense that my family knew that I was having struggles with my mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I had some people, even a media member, one night talked me out of dying.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was 17 or 18. I did a really good job of hiding a lot of the stuff I was going through, though. Like, nobody knew I was drinking the way I was. Nobody knew how bad it was. But I was in therapy and I was lying to the therapist and pretending to be straight. Like, I wouldn't even tell a therapist that I was gay. You know, so there was no support system because I didn't let them in.
Yeah. It's the level of secrecy from multiple levels of fears. You have the rejection fear, you have the, retaliation fear, disappointment fears. Like, it's just, you start going through these things of all these reactions that everyone's going to have and how that's going to affect you based on, most times, like conversations and actions that we've been privileged to by them not knowing. So it's like, I've seen how you've reacted in this situation, so it makes me feel like you're going to react the same way when it comes to me. When you start breaking that down and understanding that there's so many people who are somewhere in the community and just really feel like they cannot be truthful with you about it, even to a stranger, like, it becomes like, when you really start breaking that down, it's I don't think people realize the stress of coming out
And
what that means when you do.
yeah, and I think it's you know, it's tough as a marginalized community. And listen, I'm sitting here as a white guy who's masculine presenting. I walk down the street, people assume I'm straight. I have a lot of privilege. You know what I mean? Like
Right,
I want to
right.
recognize that. But the reality is I'm still a part of a marginalized community, and within it, a lot of our oppression is ends up being internalized.
Yeah.
Right? It's not visible.
Right.
So nobody knows it, which can be a blessing at times, I guess, because you can hide, but it's also a curse because you're stuck thinking about it and dealing with it by yourself in your mind every single day.
Yeah. Let's get to the culture shift tour. You started a tour where you're going to 100 different minor league teams over 100 days and having the conversation about just basically like combating homophobia or homophobic mentalities and practices on teams. What made you want to do that, and how is that going so far?
I never really wanted to do this stuff. To be honest with you, like it was never like in my, one day I want to.
Yeah.
I sort of fell into it. I like being the first one to come out in the sport openly out. It was challenging, and it meant that I became a face and a voice. And
Yeah.
if I don't do it, who will? So
Yeah.
I was sort of thrust into it.
Yeah.
I After doing it for a few years, it was kind of like, all right, I love doing this. I love working with people. I love seeing the shifts and people recognizing that they can make shifts and recognize their language, behaviors, attitudes. But I also like being a resource for people who are struggling and helping them find support in their communities, whatever it looks like, therapy, etc. And I love sports. I love hockey, and I want it to be the best version of itself, because for so many people, they can go to the rink, and hockey is a distraction from, if they're teenagers, like from their, a fight with their girlfriend or partner, um, dealing with parents as a teenager, school, etc. Everything else goes away.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
that for queer people too. I want that for all marginalized communities, that when they show up to the rink, they feel that way too. It's not like I'm going to go there and I'm going to hear this homophobic stuff, but I really love playing the sport. So you kind of eat it. Or, I go there as a, people of color show up and all of a sudden they're experiencing microaggressions or overt racism, and they're sitting there like, I love the sport, but how do I grapple with this? And it's like, no, it should be that space where everyone comes and is just happy to be there, and everything else disappears. So that's sort of why it happened. I wanted something. I've been doing this work for 6 or 7 years now, and I thought, let's make a splash. Let's do something over the top, and going across a country speaking on this was sort of the way to do that. And it has been a splash. It's I think now I've realized I'm a masochist. I like punishing myself because I haven't slept in a month, and
because you're a workaholic as well.
Yeah, 100 teams in 100 days was not, was a wild decision, but I mean, it's been pretty rewarding, so I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. When you're talking to these kids, are you finding that there are a lot of kids who identify as, gay, bisexual within the sport, who that was like their moment to tell someone?
I think there's been, out of the 30 teams, 30-ish, maybe 32 teams I've been to so far on the tour, at least 7 people who've come to me already. There was another incident where a team, something anti-Semitic happened, and this was like non-LGBT, and I get people from all walks of life coming to me after I speak and sharing their stories and impact, because it might not be the same, but they're experiencing some form of trauma, some sort of oppression in a space, and they need somebody to talk to. A kid came to me, some players did something that was anti-Semitic and it scared him, and he's like, you inspired me to tell them how it made me feel. So I was like, I pulled the coach aside. I said, I'm coming back in on Friday, come in your practice. Then we went back in and the kid got to talk to his teammates. And just so it's like transcending LGBTQ plus, and it's about creating those welcoming spaces for everyone. But yeah, like the 6 or 7, like it's not just players either, it's coaches, it's different groups. And here's the other reality: most of these kids are Gen Z, and Gen Z is identifying as LGBTQ plus at over 20%.
Yeah.
Like it's a huge population of people.
Yeah, they have, I feel like they have a much easier playing field. And I say often, like there's more acceptance from that generation of kids, and that generation of kids' parents are really the problem, because they're the ones causing the shit, and then their kid goes to school and like just kind of regurgitates what their mom and dad are saying. But it's a generation of high school kids that are like, yeah, he's gay, that's my friend, so what? And it's never been like that before. It was like, yeah, he's gay, and he's kind of like, who the gay kid is in school, and there's like maybe 3, and like you knew them. Now it's just like, who cares? So what? Yes, he has fingernail polish on. Yes, he wears skirts on Fridays. Like, that's John.
Yeah. And or they're like cool, and they correct their parents on pronouns.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
And it's not that deep, and it shouldn't be that, like who cares? Like I'm always fascinated when I see adults talk about things like grooming and like, oh, why is it that there's more people today? And it's like, well, until the 70s, it was illegal. You went to jail.
Right.
Then there was the HIV/AIDS epidemic and stigma around that forever. People still get kicked out of their homes to this day. Like of homeless youth, I think it's something like over 40% is LGBTQ plus. And it's like, well, so like it's easier and it's getting better, but there's still problems there. But like, this is why people didn't come out. This is why people hid who they were. It's because all of this. It's not because we didn't exist. We were always there. You just couldn't. It would potentially ruin your life.
Yeah. So at this point, and again, doing something that is not necessarily something that you said, something that it's not what you wanted to do. It's something that kind of fell into your lap. It's something that you're finding that is helping a lot of people. How would you want to move forward with this? How would you want to address more? Because again, you're crossing the line. It's not just in the LGBTQ plus community. That's crossing into lines when it comes to race, lines when it comes to religion. Like, what do you want this to grow into?
I'd eventually like to have tours. I mean, the tour itself, I'd eventually like it where I'm on the road with like 4 or 5 other people talking about different issues and their lived experience within, like whether it's an Indigenous person or a Black person talking about, racism, or a woman who's dealt with misogyny and sexism in sport, or a disabled person talking about ableism, and pick the topic, mental health and well-being, like having a few more people sharing and opening eyes to issues. I think I live by the belief that people are good by nature.
Yeah.
There's some bad people, but I would say the vast majority of people are good. Yeah. And I don't think they want to hurt people. They may not care if they make people happy, but they don't want to hurt people. And if we can teach them that this is impacting people negatively and hurting people, and that these are things we can rally around. Like, my favorite thing about sport is you look at sport and it's always like, yeah, I put my kids in sport because they learn work ethic and discipline and learning from a coach. It's like, engaging with a boss, teamwork, and all these great attributes. Well, why can't they learn about being inclusive to LGBTQ plus, BIPOC, women, disabled people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
Like, why can't these be attributes that they learn? Why can't these be rallying things the way we rally around so many different issues within sport and say, no, we're intolerant.
Right.
And
right.
if so my ultimate goal would be, larger tours, more people on it, engaging on different issues, having people with the lived experience talking about it, and sharing impact. And I think when you share impact, people who are good people are like, no, I don't want that. I don't want people to feel that way.
And I think that's the kind of the caveat of the messaging. It's kind of realizing what you may be doing to someone with your words and your actions. Finding out what jokes are funny, what jokes are not funny. I think pretty much all the gay friends that I have, we have a great sense of humor. And it's like, if you were in the space to have the jokes with us, you'll find out that we kind of joke on each other harder than you probably ever could. But it's a matter of, at what point does this joke become uncomfortable to you? And why did it make you uncomfortable? And figuring those things out, it's like we have to find the balance on our side. But on the same breath, it's like, relax a little bit. Like, we know you're straight. No one wants you. Like, you don't want the straight guy. It's just, it's not how it goes. So it's like, you're fine. This is probably the safest space that you can be in.
Totally. And even, like, I think the community has always used humor as a coping mechanism for the shit we go through. And I think, like, even when I talk about a lot of different, it's like not the lightest stuff at times, but
Yeah.
I crack jokes through the whole thing to make it engaging and fun and lighter, and so that people can just ease themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, even like when you talk about language or laughter, it's funny, those are things I talk about. My biggest thing is, if we creating welcoming environments is the easiest way to do it is through our language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I talk about 5 different types: direct language, like, which comes down to like bullying or harassment; indirect
Yeah.
language, those off the cuff remarks, like people, instead of saying they're disappointed about something or something, they're like, oh, that's gay. You know,
Yeah.
laughter, somebody's bullying somebody, harassing somebody, makes an offensive joke, everyone laughs in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, sure, it might, like, listen, there can be offensive jokes that the punchline hit well. Doesn't mean it's right. And if you're laughing at somebody else getting harassed or made fun of or joked about, you're kind of doing the same thing as calling them the names.
Yeah.
You know, body
Makes
language.
part of the problem.
Exactly. Body language is another one. And then silence. And I added silence after the murder of George Floyd. I think the Black Lives Matter movement taught us that it's not enough to go, I'm not racist, I'm a good person, when people around us are. Or I'm not homophobic, I'm a good person, but those people in my life who are saying homophobic things, like, I call it being an accessory to the crime.
Yeah.
You know, it's like going to, like, I drive my friend to a bank, they go and rob the bank, get back in my car, and I drive away.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I didn't rob the bank, I'm a good person. I'm still going to jail. Like, I'm still, you know, an accessory to that. I'm complicit.
Yeah.
It's no different if we enable that by continuing to engage with these people without having conversations and talking about what they're doing. We're enabling it.
Yeah. And I think that is the biggest message that can kind of be taught to people is being complicit to the problem is also a problem. Like, if you see it and it's like, none of my business, like, you're a part of the problem.
Yeah.
So it's not just something that you can kind of like brush under the rug. And everyone, well, most people, it kind of stays in that lane until you find out that someone close to you is identifying within the community. And then it's like, shit, okay, you can't do this anymore. Like, you can't say this around me anymore. And now you become a voice for that person. But it's like you spent so long, again, either laughing at someone else, joining in on the bullying, just staying quiet about it. Like, it's you spend a lot of that time allowing it to happen around you, which just basically allows it to grow.
And when somebody in our life does come out, or we do, you know, learn these things, it's humanized for us.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my goal, is sharing my lived experience to humanize the impact. Because the impact I felt is very similar to how others have felt in the space and in men's team sports spaces, you know, that are part of the community. So it's like, all right, well, like, this is the impact. This is what you're doing. And when we humanize issues, and like we were talking about earlier, right? Like the theory, the abstract version of it versus reality when you're staring somebody in the face. It's like, all right, now it's real. When that person in your life comes out, now it becomes real. And it's like, oh, that stuff I said really hurt them. Could have messed them up. And that's where I'm like, no, if we just humanize and then engage and educate. And I think it even comes down to even the way we talk to our friends if they are saying stuff. If we just start yelling at people and screaming at them, I've never been, some people call it tone policing, but I think if you want to get a message through to a person, especially somebody in your life that you can engage with, like, this is very different than Twitter or internet culture. But like, when you can engage with somebody in your life and you go like, hey, isn't your cousin gay, and how would they feel if they heard you saying this? That's going to have way more impact than telling them they're a bigot or homophobic. You know,
because no one wants to hear that you're homophobic or a bigot. So it's just in that moment you just shut down the conversation.
Yeah,
And that
tune it
person's
out.
no longer going to respond to you.
We're creating barriers of
Yeah.
communication. And I think we need to open up dialogue. You know, in some cases, like this isn't for every single situation thing. This is people in our lives we know we can engage with and have that initial conversation. I mean, if it continues after a while, yeah, you might yell or scream or just shut them down completely. But
yeah,
initially, I think it's the way we need to start.
Just kind of let it happen. When you came out, again, this is post-retirement, you came out. Did your former teammates respond how you thought they would have, or were a lot of the responses on the opposite end of what you expected from them?
I didn't expect it. I didn't know. I didn't know how they would respond. I didn't know how anyone would. I did it for me. I did it
Yeah.
because people were using my sexuality against me. I did it because I saw things in society like the massacre at Pulse nightclub. I saw a friend end up on a terrorist hit list for being gay and being visible in the media. I had, oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah, in Toronto in 2016. Like not that, yeah, I had, you know, I'd experienced my work. I was working in the sport after I retired, doing, you know, training, working with athletes, and I was getting blackballed. And I just did it because I thought maybe I'd help a few people.
Yeah.
I didn't know how many people would see it or care or anything, but I did it for me so that nobody could use my sexuality against me.
Yeah.
Without it being so overt. But I got messages from over 200 former teammates. I received like, and all of them, most like congratulating me, saying how proud they are, and apologizing if they ever offended me.
Wow. I mean, that's a hell of a start, man.
Yeah, it was wild. Like, and like the first day it came out, I received over 10,000 messages from people all over the world.
Overwhelming.
I was back in school. I was finishing university, and I went up to the prof at the start of the class, and I said, it was a sports business class. And so they're all following everyone who was retweeting it, like all the sports media people. And I just went up to the prof. I said, listen, this might drop while we're in class. I just want to give you a heads up in case I start getting some calls or have to leave. The prof had to cancel the class 10 minutes in.
Wow.
Everyone's my phone was blowing up, and everyone's online looking at, and it was wild. Like I had to shut my phone off, and I like drove to the gym, and I just went into the gym. Yeah. And I was like trying to like ignore all of it because I was just like shocked.
Yeah. That's nuts. I mean, it's great because it shows that there are cases where the support is going to come for you. Unfortunately, there are situations where it's the complete opposite. You get a lot of people again who say like in that instance they no longer had a family, like that kind of thing. And I think that scares a lot of people, especially people that have like strong religious backgrounds. Like it's a fear. But knowing that for some people there can be a large outpouring of support that comes after that, it may be very encouraging for them to make the decision to say, this is who I am.
And I get a lot of those kids and adults coming to me. I remember like I had this kid come to me, and I still talk to him. He's just finishing college. And when he first came to me, he's like, yeah, I'm afraid of my parents finding out, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, you know, like ultimately, if you're going to come out and get pushed on the street and, you know, and then all of a sudden you know, if they're paying for your school, you can't like maybe wait and find the right time to tell them that's right for you. You know what I mean? I always tell people that. But his parents ended up finding out, and his stepdad wasn't happy. And even now, he messaged me, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago. He messaged me the other day, and he's like, "Hey, well, my parents aren't coming to my college graduation. Will you?"
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm there." Like, you know, but like, what do you like? I almost feel like a parent to this kid.
Yeah.
And I remember another time I was speaking at a school board on a development day for all the teachers. And this woman stops me on my way out, and she was like close to retirement. And she's like, "Oh, I really liked your story." I'm like, "Thank you." And she's like, "It was great." I'm like, "Oh, thanks." She's like, "My son's gay. He just came out. He's 50. I'm like, "Wow." She's like, "Yeah, I tell him I love him, but he's going to hell." And I'm like, now we know why you came out at 50.
Now we understand.
And my face was just shocked because I shut off thinking I was leaving, so I wasn't on for this conversation. And then she's like, "Well, at least I talked to him. His brothers don't even talk to him." And I'm like,
This isn't getting better.
and so but I looked at her and I said, "I don't know about you, but the first thing I learned, I grew up Catholic. I said, the first thing I learned is he without sin casts the first stone.
Yeah.
And we're all born sinners."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Yeah, that's true." And I said, I think I remember learning that when you die, God decides who goes to heaven or hell. I'm like, "Would you agree?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Are you God?" And she's like, "No." I'm like, "Then why are you doing God's job?"
So you really started pushing the buttons.
Well, my whole thing is like, listen, I can't control if somebody's homophobic, like or transphobic or anything else. Like that's something they have to live with.
Right.
But if I can get them to critically think in the conversations we have, then at least maybe then the way they act will be, you know, with some thought behind it and some information
You have a
versus,
chance.
yeah. And it's not going to change everyone, and that's okay. That's life.
But I think that's the weird part. When it comes to this conversation, is a lot of people have, especially like the religious sector, there's a lot of, the Bible says this, the Bible says that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it's like, I don't think that's what it said. It's not, you're trying not to, we tread a very tight rope. And it is trying to be respectful to someone who's not being respectful to you. Trying not to be rude, trying not to create a stigma, trying not to take on all the characteristics that they expect you to have anyway, and still be friendly enough to have this conversation without cussing you out, because that's what you really want to do. And like just playing this game, it's like, okay. And it's challenging. But it's like you said, once you realize that's who they are and they don't want to change it, there's no changing that. Like that's where they want to sit. That's kind of where they're going to stay at.
Yeah, and but that's on them, and that's how I look at it.
Yeah,
You know,
you'll miss out on some really great people.
yeah, they're hurting their own lives because they're and I would argue they're not even fully embracing themselves. If you There's no way that you are fully embracing who you are as a person, not whether you're straight, gay, trans, anything else, if you're judging other people.
Yeah.
You're suppressing something you like, something you enjoy. You're suppressing. There's no way you can fully be yourself and hate.
Yeah. There's no space for it. There's no space. There's something about you that you don't like.
It's funny. I always say when I speak is that, because I think people conform, and whether it's their faith or other things, and I always say like normal doesn't exist. And I look around the room, I say there's, everyone here has different hair color, eye color, skin color, body shapes and sizes, different goals, dreams, and ambitions. Everyone has different thoughts going through their minds at that exact same moment. Normal doesn't exist. We're all a bunch of weirdos. And that's a beautiful thing. But it is. And because it would suck if we were all the same.
Yeah.
Like the world would suck if everyone was like me. It would be boring.
Because there's no variation.
When we embrace our weirdness, we're not going to judge others for theirs.
Yeah.
And weirdness, differences, whatever you want to call it. It's like when we embrace who we are, it's harder to then judge somebody else. But when you're trying to do something that isn't you, when you're trying to conform fully to something that has been manufactured, regardless of what it is, then you aren't fully being yourself. You're not authentic. So you're more likely to judge others who are being authentic because it scares you.
Yeah. And I tell people, especially the younger generation that come out a lot earlier, like it's like I applaud it, because it's like you had a courage that my generation really didn't have. It takes a lot to do that at a young age and say like, again, this is me. But again, the support system again is different. But knowing that you'll avoid a lot of the nonsense that a lot of us carried from, teenage years through somewhere in adulthood when we decided like to say something, it's wasted years of trying to pretend and wear this mask that the world wants you to wear, and you can't fully be who you are. And for them to avoid all that, like I love it for them.
They're so courageous. Yes, it's probably, I think there's different stigmas and different things they go through. It's less obviously than, being jailed or everything else. But kids today are more willing and to be unapologetically themselves. And it likely has to do with the fact that they are exposed to so much more at younger ages. And like I look at, I'm 40. Well, the generation before me died.
Yeah.
I didn't have somebody to look at and be like, oh, that's who I'm like. You know what I mean? Like I just didn't see myself. Yeah. And that's the other reason why I do this, is because then maybe somebody will see themselves and feel a little more comfortable.
It's important, man. That's important. Brock, man, it's been a pleasure. I think this is it's a great conversation. It's a great topic. I think you're going to change a lot of lives and change a lot of perspectives. It's something that I think professional sports, college sports, high school sports need to have more of an understanding and awareness about, and that the locker room situations our locker room talk becomes kind of a gateway to some nasty things that can make somebody go further into whatever their personal closet is. So the fact that you're doing this, man, I think is extremely important. I think a lot of people are going to find some comfort in it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. All right, then we are all set. Let me see in that.
So in the meantime, man, make sure y'all follow us on social media. Make sure you get up with us. Everything is at SUAVV Magazine. Check out the website, suavv.com. Make sure you subscribe to our website, subscribe to this podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right. So until next time, as always, y'all be safe, be blessed, and stay suave. Peace.